Hi, Ellery. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I think we're going to have a really interesting chat because you're such an expert on Beatrice Hastings and with Oxyapalus and the exhibition, which was just starting to wrap up at the Levinson Gallery. And I know that you got to be there in person. I'd love to hear some of the tales and stories about Beatrice Hastings. And maybe before we get started, you can share a little bit about your background and we get to learn a little bit about you, Ellery.
Of course, and thank you for having me. So a little bit about my background. I'm actually a PhD student at University College London, and I first encountered my darling Beatrice Hastings when I was doing my master's there. And I first read her writing in this long form essay by a professor named Lucy Delap over at Cambridge. The essay was called Feminist and Anti-Feminist Encounters in Edwardian Britain. And there was only a bit about Hastings in there, but it included a sample of her writing. And it was different. It was funny and angry, and she clearly had a lot to say. And there was this mention of how she'd written under all these pseudonyms, which really piqued my interest. So I started digging a bit more, doing my own research, and I thought, why haven't I heard of this woman before? Why hasn't everyone heard of this woman before? So that's sort of how I became the Beatrice Hastings expert you see before you.
No, that's incredible. So what do you think, intrigued you the most? She's just such a colorful character and she did so many things that people aren't aware of. What really intrigued you the most about her?
I have to say what first got me was the pseudonyms. So just to sum that up, Beatrice Hastings wrote under at least 13 different pseudonyms.
Wow.
We're not sure, maybe more than that. And men, women, gender ambiguous characters with just initials on all different kinds of topics: politics, spirituality, art, literature. She also wrote fiction.
It seemed like she was so ahead of her time, right? You hear maybe some of those kind of things happening today, but at that time, that was kind of unheard of, right?
Oh, she was 100% ahead of her time, even in her political views. In many ways, she reads like sort of a modern feminist, and Edwardian feminist circles were horrified by her.
Yeah.
She was not afraid of controversy.
So she was definitely pushing boundaries for sure.
Yes. And actually, Virginia Woolf thought that her and some of her friends and lovers, Catherine Mansfield, A.R. Orridge, she called them the underworld because they were so experimental and weird. And even the other London literary people were like, ooh, those guys. So how can you not be intrigued by that?
No, that's right. So she really, even though she was a feminist herself, she upset other feminists, right?
Yes, she did. Because Edwardian feminism is very different, or rather was very different from what you and I would consider feminism. And a lot of the Edwardian feminists really embraced this idea that men and women were fundamentally different and that women should be honored because they bring something to society that men can't. And Hastings was having none of that. She was like, this is a booby prize and it's nonsense.
No, it's incredible. But when you're talking about her pseudonyms, there were cases where she actually played multiple roles in the same discussion, right?
Yes, and that was one of the first pieces of hers I ever read, the Treformis letters, where she had written an article. She had this suffragette persona, Beatrice Tina, wrote several articles about women's rights under that name. And one of them received this very angry criticism from a guy called D. Treformis. And they end up having this back and forth in the letters to the editor section of The New Age, which was the magazine she wrote for at the time.
Yeah.
And D. Treformis was also her.
Yeah.
And
it's crazy, right? I mean, but it's really interesting because was she trying to play out both sides for one side to win, or how do you think she was doing that, right?
So in that particular case, I mean, there are instances where it's speculated that she was just courting controversy or trying to build publicity.
Yeah.
In that particular case, it was a little different.
Okay.
Because at the end, her two personae were sort of coming to an accord with each other and had hashed out some things. And
Really
I think this was
interesting.
an intellectual exercise. I
Yeah,
think she was publishing much faster than she was forming opinions.
yeah.
And she's sort of playing with the ideas as she's printing them in this magazine,
I,
especially, sorry.
so when she was doing those kind of things, right? She had an agenda, but it seemed like the agenda changed from time to time. Right? I mean, she was on multiple sides of different arguments, but she was also working and fighting different battles, right? Like suffragette, right?
Yes, yeah, she was very much a vaudevillian and a generalist.
Yeah.
We really like our historical figures to be just one thing, I've found, and she was not like that. Uh, she was a suffragette. She was also heavily involved with the theosophist movement and spiritualism, uh,
Uh, I mean, it's
occultism.
just so multifaceted, right? I mean, sometimes you say, well, there's multiple sides to a person, like they're a cube, right? You can switch it around. In this case, it's like a Rubik's cube that just keeps twisting and changing, right? It's just pretty amazing. And maybe because you've looked at the history of this, how was she involved with Modigliani? And I know that there was a spirited romance that was there, but how did she get involved with him?
Okay, so she actually went to Paris kind of on the rebound. She had been in this very complicated relationship with her editor at the New Age, A.R. Orridge, and Catherine Mansfield, the writer. And all three of them were involved with each other in various configurations, and it had ended very badly.
Okay.
So Modigliani was kind of a rebound. She wanted to get out of London, put some space between that and her, and it was not love at first sight. Uh, there are records of her first meeting with Modigliani where she says, like, I met an ugly, rude man and I didn't like him.
That's pretty. That's really. But they ended up really having this passionate, relationship, right? And was on again, off again, right?
Oh, yes. And they were, so after he had sort of put on his company manners, managed to charm her a bit, they fell really hard for each other. And he was 5 years younger than her. And while he'd been involved casually with quite a few women before, she's considered his first great love.
Yes.
And they also really pushed each other creatively. And so they were both putting out a tremendous amount of work, in his case, paintings, in her case, journalism, fiction, poetry, all manner of things.
So there was a synergistic relationship, right? I mean, they definitely helped each other, right? And spurred that creativity. And some of it might have been from passion, some of it might have been out of anger, but there was a lot. And when I saw the different paintings that he did of her, they're very different from each other, right? And many of these have been auctioned off, and they're very collectible pieces, but each one seems different. And I was curious to see your opinion, because you said you've had a chance to see many of those.
Yes, I was lucky enough when the Tate Modern was having a Modigliani retrospective, which was a fantastic exhibit, by the way. They had several of his Hastings portraits, which I was very excited to see. And as you pointed out, they were really only together for 2 years, which is not a lot of time in terms of the differences can't be explained by physical changes in her appearance. Yes. I do think it was more, as I've been saying, she was such a multifaceted person. And as an artist, especially as someone who was not one of these strict hyperrealists, he wanted to capture different aspects of her. And she was this woman of many faces, many names. And I think each painting sort of reflecting a different side.
Yes. So you had the opportunity to go to the Levinson Gallery, and you actually saw Lost Beatrice Hastings, right? So the amazing piece that the Oxy Palace team put together, where they were able to find this painting that he had covered up, right, and created this portrait of a girl, and underneath it was Beatrice Hastings, and through AI they were able to bring this piece back. And I was wondering, when you saw that, what was your feelings, right? Because you studied her, and I just wanted to see what your reaction was when you saw that piece.
Well, my initial reaction was I was just delighted. I was glad to see her getting some attention, being talked about. I also, the piece that Oxia Palace were able to uncover, I personally like a lot better than some of his other Hastings portraits.
Why is that?
It's hard to describe because art is so personal, even
Yeah.
now, 100 years after it was created. But I've seen a lot of photographs of Hastings, and looking at that portrait, it was obvious to me that it was the same woman, which was
Yes.
not always the case in some of his portraits of her. But this one, you could tell, yes, that's Beatrice.
So you can imagine Modigliani now seeing that this woman that he was in love with, right, his first love, and then this painting that was painted over, and I'm sure there was reasons why he did that. What do you think he would think of this painting coming back to life? I'm just curious. Like, it's hard to understand different people's perspectives, but since you've studied this in a different way, I'm just curious your feeling about that, right?
Well, I unfortunately never had the chance to read his diaries or letters the way I have with Hastings.
Yes.
But knowing what I do know about both his personality and their relationship, I think he'd be of two minds. That on the one hand, they broke each other's hearts, and he painted over this. I suspect it was the only Hastings portrait he still physically had around, and he just didn't want to meet her gaze anymore.
Yes.
So I think he'd be upset in that, but also I think he'd be proud. I think he'd be happy. I think after all this time.
How about Beatrice? What do you think she would think of seeing this painting coming back to life, right? Because she was a spiritualist herself, so.
Yes. I mean, she might think this is proof of some of her more transcendental beliefs that everything renews, all is one. But I also think she'd just be delighted. For all she kept herself sort of hidden in mystery, she was a vain woman. She liked attention. She liked controversy.
She's getting attention now. This is receiving international press. This is a big story of how this was uncovered. And now knowing the story under the story, right? And behind the scenes. But before we wrap up, you have so much insight into her. What do you think you'd like to, share with the people that are watching this and that are interested in Beatrice? Like, what do you want to share that, kind of your closing thoughts about her?
Well, first of all, that it's a crying shame that she's not better known. But also, I'd like to share that one of the reasons that I love her so much and find her so fascinating, well, there's two reasons. The first was how ahead of her time she was. You read the way she writes, and with some slight adjustment for language, you could see a modern person saying these things.
Yes.
And you could understand it. And it rang true for me in a way that 100-year-old political writing seldom does.
Yes.
Even when you're reading something like, she wrote this book, Old New Age, about the periodical she had worked for with Mansfield and Orridge. And a lot of it is just gossip. And it's so human and so personal. That's one of the things I love about her the most. And the other is, getting back to this idea of so human, is that because she was so multifaceted, reading her work and studying her, this is true of all historical figures, but because of the nature of her work and because of the path my research has taken, it's easy to forget that historical figures were people. And that, you study Queen Victoria and you've got this image of her sort of glued to her throne, holding a scepter, talking about Albert and not being amused. And, no, that wasn't true. She had a sense of humor and favorite foods and petty arguments. And the thing I love about Hastings is she's so multidimensional and so human. You can't pigeonhole her or turn her into sort of a marble statue in your head for even a moment.
This seems like this would be like an ultimate, Hollywood movie, right? If how Modigliani and his relationship with Beatrice Hastings. Who do you think would make the right person to play Beatrice Hastings?
Oh, goodness. There's a thought, because you got to get the right physical type, but also.
Yeah, you've studied her, right? So I'm just curious your thoughts on that. Like who could actually play that big personality or multiple personalities that she had, right?
I would want it to be an English actress, because having someone try and do the accent, let alone a South African accent that has morphed into an English accent.
Yes.
I don't know any American actress.
And she hid a lot of that, that she was from there, right? I mean, I think that was a part of her that she was hiding from others, right?
Yes. It's interesting because on the one hand, she was very, very private about her early life in South Africa or the fact that she had grown up there at all. On the other hand, she wrote this novel, The Female Quixote, which was this all-female South African themed parody of Don Quixote about two women trying to go on a quest in rural South Africa.
Yeah.
So like, it's clear that she never really severed those ties, even if she did hide them.
Yeah.
But back to who would play her. My instinct is actually Emily Blunt, because she's a really multifaceted actress. So I think playing a multifaceted person, she could do it justice.
Yeah. Or maybe Hollywood could tap you.
I'm taking calls.
Well, Ellery, it was fantastic speaking with you today. You're adding so much color and commentary and really telling Beatrice's story the way that she'd want it to be told. And no wonder you're doing your research there. And congratulations on everything that you've accomplished so far. I know you're finishing up your PhD right now at UCL. And thanks again for doing this with us. I really appreciate it. And you really did a great job telling the story of the painting, under the painting, and the story behind the story. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it was fantastic. All right, thanks again.